So we are continuing this morning our review of the book Daring Greatly in our series of distilling wisdom from books and using that to create your ideal life. So the subtitle of the book, How the Courage to Be Vulnerable Transforms the Way We Live, Love, Parent and Lead. Just to get a quick idea of how much reviewing I need to do, let's just ask a tough question. Glenn's been too busy having networking breakfast to read any of it, I think. Is that right?
Doesn't sound like Glenn.
Yeah. And Jules, how are you? You haven't had a chance to look at it at all?
No, I bought it. I got it.
That's a start.
That's a good start.
That significantly increases your chances of reading it. And Stan, you've been in audio mode?
Yeah, and I listened to it I listened to it like 3 or 4 weeks ago on Audible, so I can't remember.
All right, we'll continue. So I just thought I'd ask that question as to who's done what, just so I get a rough idea. I'll try to speed through, give you a very quick summary of what we've covered so far. So we've done the introduction, which was entitled "What It Means to Dare Greatly," and that was just explaining where the title of the book came from, which was lifted directly out of the great speech by Theodore Roosevelt at Citizenship in a Republic speech, which has now become known as the Man in the Arena speech, because the man in the arena is daring greatly, not the critic, and all that sort of all the people who on the sidelines like to snipe from the sidelines. But if you're out there doing it, you are daring greatly. And in order to do that, there is an element of making yourself vulnerable. You have to live with the tension. As Seth Godin likes to talk about this, the tension between this might work and this might not work. So in order to achieve pretty much anything, whether it's the way we live, the way we love, the way we parent, the way we lead, we have to be vulnerable. We have to risk not succeeding in some area at what we're doing. And quite often we might be a little bit afraid of doing that. So it tends to make us want to hold back sometimes. So then she covered an introduction with her adventures in the arena and how I love Brené's very, very open and vulnerable, how she talks about her discussions with her therapist. I love listening to her. I think she's quite funny. Her vulnerability or her transparency in sharing some of the things she shares with the conversations with her husband and situations with her school and other parents and things that she absolutely stuffs up sometimes. I love that about her, that she's just so open about it all, and she turns it into a lesson, and she uses that lesson in the book to get her points across. So in her introduction, she just gave a little bit of a background of how she came to be in this area. She started off as a social worker and then ended up going into the research area of it and started her focus of researching on the topics of shame and vulnerability, which are not your everyday topics really, and quite often things that a lot of people are quite uncomfortable talking about. Because in order to talk about vulnerability, you need to talk about when you are vulnerable, which we don't like doing. So it's quite an interesting sort of juxtaposition of ideas there. So she covers in that introduction what she talks about. Well, she references her other book, The Gifts of Imperfection, where she came up with 10 guideposts for what she calls wholehearted living. So wholehearted living is where you risk being vulnerable. You take control of your life. You do the things that you want to do, and you stop worrying about having to be perfect or having to worry about what other people think of you, not comparing yourself with others, developing an inner confidence in your own ability and that you're good enough. This is the big challenge underneath everything, is that we all have this imposter syndrome at work. When you go to do anything new, and I'm pretty sure all of us will have experienced it at some point, you go to do something new and you start thinking, can I do this? Am I good enough to do this? Do I have all the skills I need? Do I have the knowledge I need? what if it doesn't work? Are people going to think I'm stupid? Am I setting myself up for looking like an idiot here, for even having a go at this? So wholehearted living is really where you develop that inner knowing that, okay, I might stuff this up, but that's okay, because it doesn't define me as a person. So no matter what gets done, how much is left undone, I am enough. And in the process, I'm also brave for having a go, and I'm worthy of love and belonging anyway. I'm not going to be ostracized by my friends and made to feel like I'm a complete loser if I don't make this work, whatever it is that you're trying to make work. So she says the wholehearted identify vulnerability as the catalyst for courage, compassion, and connection. So she talks a lot about this sense of connection that we feel, how important social connection is for us as human beings. And that goes right back to our caveman days. You know, we want to be huddled around the fire with our mates, safe from all the beasts outside. We don't want to be on our own out there feeling vulnerable and alone. And so there's a large part of our human nature today that really goes back to those sort of ancient historical beginnings. Okay. And that if we don't have failure as an option, we actually stifle our ability to learn, to be creative, and to innovate, because innovation and being creative requires that we are vulnerable, requires that we risk this might not work. So that's really the introduction, where she's up to. Then she talks about, in chapter 1, scarcity. Just before I carry on, does anyone want to add anything to any of that? No? Any thoughts on that? No? Okay. Scarcity. So looking inside our culture, and our culture starts off by telling us that we're not enough, and that we should blame somebody else, and that we should fear all the stuff that we don't know, or that, you know, if you look at the news, it's just full of delightful stuff like wars and floods and famines and fires and all the stuff that happens that goes wrong in the world. They tend to focus on that rather than on the good news stories, because let's face it, it's hardly breaking news to say Glenn got up today and he went to work and he had a business networking meeting and he had a really great day. Well, for me, it's actually quite good, because I know Glenn's history and that he might not be with us. So, you know, that is a good thing. But for a lot of other people, they'd be like, well, that's not really thrilling news, is it? But far more exciting if something bad happens that we can talk about, you know.
Isn't it the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads?
I hadn't heard that one, but yeah, that's...
You haven't? Oh.
Never heard that.
Very good, Jules.
News.
There's also a cultural thing in our society of a fear of being ordinary, that, you know, we have to all strive to be some superhuman, and that we should feel ashamed of ourselves if we're not really giving it a go to be like Superman. Or we have all these action figures in our lives, you know, the Marvel heroes and all this stuff. And if we're just Mr. and Mrs. Ordinary, well, that's a bit boring, isn't it? We're not really daring greatly there. And there was this great little quote, I love this, from a book, or from a friend of hers called Lynn Twist. In a book called The Soul of Money, she referred to scarcity as the great lie. For me, and for many of us, our first waking thought of the day is, I didn't get enough sleep. The next one is, I don't have enough time. Whether it's true or not, the thought of not enough occurs to us automatically before we even think to question or examine it. We spend most of the hours in the days of our lives hearing, explaining, complaining, or worrying about what we don't have enough of. Before we even sit up in bed, before our feet touch the floor, we're already inadequate, already behind, already losing, already lacking something. And by the time we go to bed at night, our minds are racing with a litany of what we didn't get or didn't get done that day. We go to sleep burdened by those thoughts, and we wake up to the reverie of lack. This internal condition of scarcity, this mindset of scarcity, lives at the very heart of our jealousies, our greed, our prejudice, and our arguments with life. I thought that was very succinctly put. So we've got this thing where we start off thinking we're not enough, even before we get out of bed in the morning. Didn't get enough of whatever. And these things can lead to shame, comparison, and nasty thing, disengagement. So going back to this definition of wholeheartedness, she says that at its very core, it's vulnerability and worthiness, facing uncertainty, exposure, and emotional risks, and knowing that I am enough. All right. So that was scarcity, that we're sick of feeling afraid. There's a culture of it that we're surrounded with. And so chapter 2, she went on to debunking the vulnerability myths. I love this. Some of her wording is great. The torture chamber that we call uncertainty. That's really powerful, isn't it? So myth number 1, that vulnerability is weakness. Well, it isn't. It's actually the opposite, isn't it? You've got to be courageous to put yourself out there and put yourself on the line and risk being criticized and condemned, and risk being pushed out of the cave and abandoned by the rest of the crowd, left to be eaten by the dinosaurs. And there's a whole bunch of things that she lists as where we may feel particularly vulnerable, you know, sharing an unpopular idea, speaking up at a meeting, trying something new, losing your job, having your business fail, being made redundant, all those sorts of things. They can really pull the rug out from under you, can't they? So truth and courage aren't always comfortable, but they're never weakness. They're the opposite. They are actually strength. Another thing that was curious was she said, particularly in reference to public speaking, we love seeing raw truth and openness in other people because we think we can admire their courage, right? But we're afraid to let them see it in us. We're afraid that our truth isn't enough, that what we have to offer isn't enough. So vulnerability is courage in you and inadequacy in me. If I let you see that I'm vulnerable, then I'm feeling like I'm being weak. But in actual fact, I'm the opposite. I'm being courageous. So myth number 2, I don't do vulnerability. There's a lot of people who think, no, I just don't do it. And they put up a wall around themselves. And certain occupations, you probably noticed that. Lawyers is one that popped into my mind for some reason. Myth number 3, vulnerability is letting it all hang out. And that's, again, not true. Sharing our feelings, particularly for guys. Guys are notoriously bad at sharing their feelings, aren't they? Unless they have a strong connection with their feminine side. And so, we're it's that culture. We're taught to bottle it up, to be a man, get on with it, pick yourself up. All right, what else? I'm just flicking through. Myth number 4, that we can go it all alone. No, we need other people. We need to collaborate with people if we're going to make things happen. Trying to do it all on your own is to do a little bit sometimes with not wanting to risk being vulnerable, but it's actually more powerful if we can get a team together and get other people's ideas and input and get things happening. Chapter 3 then was understanding and combating shame. This was a very big chapter, big topic. Shame derives its power from being unspeakable. And I love the start of this chapter where she says, vulnerability and shame in one book. Are you trying to kill us? Because they're 2 very big topics, aren't they? Very powerful topics. Or defense against the dark arts. So we all have shame. We all have good and bad, dark and light inside of us. But if we don't come to terms with our shame, our struggles, we start believing that there's something wrong with us, that we're bad, we're flawed, not good enough. And even worse, we start acting on those beliefs. If we want to be fully engaged, to be connected, we have to be vulnerable. And in order to be vulnerable, we need to develop resilience to shame. Right. So what is that all about? Well, shame tells you that you're not good enough and that you should have known better than to even try. That feeling of, oh, what an idiot I am. I should have realized I'm I'm not good enough and I shouldn't have bothered having a go because now I've just made myself look like an idiot. No, regardless of the outcome, you've actually already dared greatly, and that's totally aligned with your values of who you want to be. So, and interesting, this one, she said shame started as a two-person experience. Maybe your parents might have shamed you, or your teacher, or somebody, a boss that put you down. Shame is a terrible weapon to use in a business situation, isn't it? When you deliberately embarrass an employee in front of their colleagues or something, to get a point across, it's a really bad way of managing and leading. And so it starts out as a two-person process. There's somebody giving you the reason to be ashamed and you taking it on board. And she said, as I got older, I learned how to do shame all by myself. So sometimes when we dare to walk into the arena, the greatest critic we face is ourselves, our own inner critic. So shame resilience, what is that? It's the ability to say, this hurts, this is disappointing, maybe even devastating, but success and recognition and approval are not the values that drive me. My value is courage, and I was just courageous. So shame, you can bugger off. You treat shame as you get hit with the feeling, but if you can personalize it, even give it a name, go, right, I know what you're trying to do. You're trying to make me feel ashamed. You can bugger off, get lost. I'm not taking that on board because I was brave enough to have a go. And she said, so why is shame? What is shame and why is it so hard to talk about? Well, shame is firstly the fear of disconnection. The fear that something we've done or failed to do, an ideal that we've not lived up to, or a goal that we've not accomplished, makes us unworthy of connection. That we don't belong, that we're not good enough, we're not lovable enough. So that's a terrible thing, isn't it, to feel that you're not worthy of love or belonging. And this is where you see people with really low self-esteem. And then what does it lead to? Things like addiction or mental, physical health issues. If you don't believe that you're good enough, you start acting as if you're not good enough. So it can really take you down a nasty spiral. Difference here, guilt is I did something bad. Shame is I am bad. Big difference, hey? Guilt we can live with because, okay, I stuffed up there, I did something wrong, or I breached my own values in some way. I told a lie when I pride myself on being honest. Not that any of us would ever tell a lie. I know the people on this call are all absolutely straight down the line people. But just supposing hypothetically that you might have told a little sneaky white lie, you might think, oh, that was a bit naughty of me, I'm bad. But if you actually, or I did something bad, but if you actually think I am a bad person, that's shame. And shame corrodes the very part of us that believes that we can change and we can do better. So shame resilience is about moving from shame to empathy. So if we can share our story with someone who responds with empathy and understanding, then shame can't survive. So this is where actually having people around you that you can trust, that you can share conversations with, ideas with, even share where you've got something wrong and turn it into a learning experience instead, then it can be something useful to you rather than something that's dragging you down. So surrounding yourself with a good team or a good network of people, good friends, people who deserve or have earned the ability and the right to hear you at your worst and still have the best intentions for you, still care about you, say, okay, yeah, you stuffed that up, but it's okay, you're a good guy, pick yourself up and have a, move on, and they'll give you some encouragement, some support. Right. Oh, interesting one. The pain of shame is enough to trigger that survival part of our brain that runs, hides, or comes out swinging. How many times have you come across a situation where someone, particularly in a workplace, is actually ashamed of something. So instead of admitting, oh yeah, I stuffed up there, and so instead they'll try and defend that position and blame somebody else or get angry because they don't want to admit that they are the one who's made a mistake. And so they go into like survival mode and get angry and nasty or obnoxious. And it's because they're ashamed, or they yell at someone, or they do something that's sort of out of character or out of the norm. So according to a researcher called Dr. Linda Hartling, a relational cultural theorist at the Stone Center, and now this is an interesting title, Director of Human Dignity and Humiliation Studies. What a title is that? Humiliation Studies. She said, in order to deal with shame, some of us move away by withdrawing, hiding, silencing ourselves and keeping secrets. Some of us move towards by seeking to appease and please. And some of us move against by trying to gain power over others, by being aggressive, and by using shame to fight shame, like sending really mean emails, for example. There you go. So she started a journey of moving from what will people think to I am enough. And that's part of that is recognizing when you do feel those feelings of shame or guilt or feeling like you're not good enough. She quotes Carl Jung, I am not what has happened to me. I am what I choose to become. All right. So empathy is connection, and it's a ladder out of the shame hole. What else? Oh, well, you might have heard this before in some other places. The act of writing things down, how you feel about things, or as we call it, journaling, can be quite a powerful antidote to that, to actually getting it out of your head and getting rid of those feelings, and especially something that's been sort of traumatic. They reckon, it says in here somewhere, that the research found that the act of not discussing a traumatic event or confiding it to another person could be more damaging than the actual event. Let that one sink in for a moment. That's powerful, isn't it? If we have something terrible, traumatic happen, and that's traumatic in itself, but bottling it up and not talking about it can make it worse. But obviously you've got to pick the people you share it. You don't lead that with that in the conversation as you walk through the checkout. You know, I had a really horrible thing happen to me today and I really did this wrong. No, you pick the right people to have that conversation with. Okay. Oh, so she'd done all her research on women, and then she found that she'd kind of neglected men. And one of her events, a man came up to afterwards and said, you need to include men in this too. So she started doing research on men, and she found that men have the pressure of one unrelenting message, which is do not be perceived as weak. Well, actually, I'll use the naughty word. She said most men in their responses to her surveys said your basically response is don't be a pussy. So that, you know, you're meant to be tough as a man. You're not meant to show weakness. All right. Oh, and this was interesting. Men know what women really want. They want us to pretend to be vulnerable. We get really good at pretending. But they actually want the man to be strong and take control and sort things out. But they'll tell you that they want a man who will show his feelings and be vulnerable. What do you think of that, Jules, as the only lady on the call here today?
Yeah, we want it all, you know. You're going to try and read our minds as well.
I'm not that brave.
It's okay reading minds, but it's reading the mind when it keeps changing.
Can't make its mind up.
Yeah, that would never happen in my house, obviously.
Oh, that's a whole nother discussion in itself, isn't it?
It is. You know, that she even goes on to talk about one of the big things is sex and the fear of rejection or the fear of not being good enough, and that and this is what can drive blokes to go off to prostitutes and so on, is fear of rejection, of being knocked back, or that, you know, you're not good enough. Whereas the ladies of the night are very good at pretending that you're awesome. So you're the best. So yeah, that was an interesting sideline there. Sidebar. So yeah, in other words, there's no intimacy without vulnerability as well. So in your relationships, you know, you think about it, your best friend, your partner, you reveal your thoughts and your feelings, don't you, to them? So this is part of what builds that relationship, is that you've got someone that you can trust with those things, those vulnerabilities. Okay. Ooh, it's a big chapter, that one. All right. If we're going to find our way out of shame and back to each other, vulnerability is the path and courage is the light. To set down those lists of what we're supposed to be is brave. To love ourselves and support each other in the process of becoming real is perhaps the greatest single act of daring greatly. There you go. That's my summary of where we're up to. Goodness me, that took a fair chunk of time because we've covered a couple of big topics there. The next chapter is chapter 4, the Vulnerability Armory. Before we go on to that, has anyone got any comments on what we've just covered so far? I know if you haven't read it, I've just given you a lot of content there. All right, if you think of anything and you want to chip in.
Yeah, I did have something, but it's gone now. I should have written it down.
That's all right. It might pop back in your mind in a minute. All right, we'll go on to chapter 4, just conscious of time, keeping it moving along. The Vulnerability Armory. So as adults, well, as children, we found ways to protect ourselves. We put on armor. We used our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors as weapons, and we learned how to make ourselves scarce or even disappear, go and hide in the cupboard, whatever it was. Now, as adults, we realize that to live with courage, purpose, and connection, to be the person whom we long to be, we must again be vulnerable. We must take off the armor, put down the weapons, show up, and let ourselves be seen. Dun, dun, dun. Here we are, being seen on the Zoom call. And we're being vulnerable if we share our thoughts and ideas. So vulnerability is the last thing I want you to see in me, but the first thing I look for in you. We admire vulnerability, don't we? We're actually impressed when someone is open and reveals that. You might think they're a great movie star, but then you realize that they share that they actually had some struggles and at times didn't think that they were good enough and might not be able to do it. I watched the Directors Roundtable recently. Some of the best directors, people like Tarantino and so on, were on this conversation around the table, and they all revealed that there were times when they thought, they're going to realize in a minute that I haven't got a clue what I'm doing here. And these are some of the best directors of some of the greatest movies we've ever seen. And they all agreed that there were moments when they thought, am I good enough to pull this off? So it's interesting, isn't it? Our heroes, the people we look up to the most, people we admire, all have those same human feelings and doubts. The difference is they push on regardless. And they do it. And in doing it, they realize that they are enough, that they can do it. So every strategy illuminated by the research participants for freeing themselves from their armor I am enough, worthiness versus shame. I've had enough, boundaries versus one-upping and comparison. Showing up, taking risks, and letting myself be seen is enough. That's engagement versus disengagement. And she said, as you read through this chapter, I think it's helpful for you to know that every single person I interviewed spoke about struggling with vulnerability. So there you go, people. You're not alone. Everyone feels it. 3 forms of shielding that she introduces as the common vulnerability arsenal. One is foreboding joy. That sense, we've talked about this in previous ones, where everything's going too well. Everything's ticking along really well in my life. What could go wrong? This can't last. You know? So that foreboding joy is, do I dare to allow myself to think that this is normal? This is the new, everything going well. This is great. This is awesome. This is how it should be. Or do I start thinking things are going so well, surely something's going to stuff up in a minute? Anyone
Always remember as a kid, my dad had a thing on his wall in the office in his printing business. It's a wonderful day. Just wait for some bee coming along to absolutely make a mess of it for me.
So what are you doing? You're setting yourself up for that, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're actually looking for it. So you're going to attract it.
Yeah.
You are going to get the awkward customer that walks in and gives you a hard time because you're expecting to have one. Perfectionism. Anyone relate to that one? Anyone ever felt that everything's got to be perfect? Otherwise, you know, you'll be embarrassed or ashamed, or someone might think badly of you if it's not perfect enough. We were talking about that yesterday, actually, because friend of ours, Fiona, had confessed that she suffers from perfectionism.
No.
Yes.
Really?
No, I can't see it.
Because and she knows, she's accepted that she's realized it in herself and she's working on it, so that's great, you know. But it does come from a fear of being judged by people, fear of not being good enough. Numbing. Well, I know none of us would do this. The embrace of whatever deadens the pain of discomfort and pain. What might that be? Well, alcohol, drugs, Netflix, Yellowstone. Yeah, one of my favorite series at the moment. But you know, if you're, are you avoiding your issues? Are you avoiding dealing with stuff in your own life by substituting one of these things where you can just numb yourself out instead, so you don't think about it, you know, you block it. All right. Oh, I love this, with going back to that first one, that foreboding joy, this expression, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Have you ever heard that one? Ever heard that expression? The expression originated in the early 1900s, quick history lesson here, when new immigrants and people flooding to the cities were crammed into tenement housing, where you could literally hear your upstairs neighbor taking off his shoes at night. Once you heard the first shoe hit the floor, you waited for the other shoe to drop. Even though the world today is much safer in many ways than it was in the early part of that century, and our life expectancy is far greater than that of the folks who were listening for a second shoe to hit the floor, the stakes feel so much higher to us. Most of us today think of the other shoe as something terrifying, a terrorist attack, a natural disaster, an E. coli outbreak in our local grocery store, a school shooting. Isn't that true? We're kind of, everything's going so well. Or there's going to be another outbreak of the pandemic soon, or there's going to be a flood or a fire, and the news media is just filling you. Oh, interest rates are going to go up. There's going to be a worldwide recession. We're all going to be struggling to pay our electricity bills. We'll be huddled together in the winter, you know, looking for warmth, and there'll be beasts at the door. What?
Just going to say, it's the news and the media that gets hold of it and just blows it out of proportion.
Yeah.
They've started, I think I mentioned on the last time, they started reporting now that the average mortgage is $500,000. Well, I don't know. Too many people have got that. But, and then they, instead of reporting on the fuel prices as being the lowest possible price, like you know, 91 RON, they started reporting on the premium one because obviously the price is higher. Just
They spin it the way they want to go,
switch the
don't they?
radio and turn it off in the car.
And governments can do that too to boost, because if you influence the way people think, you influence the economy. If you get people feeling confident, they'll invest. If they're all feeling fearful, they'll hold on to their money.
Oh, it's all right though, because the Reserve Bank said sorry.
Yeah, I mean, he was going to get fired for it, wasn't he? The CEO that said sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's okay. Carry on.
How dare you apologise?
Yeah, apologise for those people that are going to be buried in a few years' time.
Yeah. All right. So I like this little quote. A man in his early 60s. Oh, hang on. I'm in my early 60s. Told me, I used to think the best way to go through life was to expect the worst. Ooh. That way, if it happened, you were prepared. And if it didn't happen, you were pleasantly surprised. Then I was in a car accident. My wife was killed. Needless to say, expecting the worst didn't prepare me at all. And worse, I still grieve for all of the wonderful memories we shared and that I didn't fully enjoy. My commitment to her is to fully enjoy every moment now. I just wish she was here, and now that I know how to do that. So if you spend your life thinking, well, this can't last, it's going to get terrible in a minute, you're not being fully present, are you? You're not actually enjoying the moment. So terrible realization that she noticed that this concept of foreboding joy as a method of minimizing vulnerability is best understood as a continuum that runs from rehearsing tragedy to what I call perpetual disappointment. It actually fuels a sort of an attitude of pessimism, doesn't it? And if we didn't have enough images in our mind, you only have to turn on the news and you'll get plenty of images of why the world is going to, what is it, hell in a handbasket, I think she said in the book. Gratitude, therefore, emerged from the data as the antidote to foreboding joy, being grateful for what you do have and the way your life is going. Joy comes to us in moments, ordinary moments. We risk missing out on joy when we get too busy chasing down the extraordinary. So be grateful for what you have and don't squander joy. Good advice.
Damn right.
Hey, life's going well, and that's great, and I'm going to enjoy it. Not I'm going to sit there waiting for the other shoe to drop. So she says, perfectionism is not the path that leads us to our gifts and our sense of purpose. It's the hazardous detour. We think that by trying to do everything perfect, we'll avoid the pain of blame, judgment, and shame. But at its core, it's about trying to earn approval. Healthy striving is self-focused. How can I improve? Perfectionism is other-focused. What will they think? So perfectionism actually hampers your achievement, and it's self-destructive. Why? Because perfection doesn't actually exist. It's an unattainable goal. Nothing that we do is ever perfect. There's always room for improvement, isn't there? So you're setting yourself up to be perpetually not good enough. All right. How do we stop that? We learn to talk to ourselves the same way we talk to someone we care about. Instead of demanding that we're perfect in our own heads, we actually treat ourselves as if we were a best friend. That's okay. Look, you've done your best. That's all you can ask. Be kind to yourself. Be human. A 20-minute walk that I do is better than the 4-mile run that I don't do. The imperfect book that gets published is better than the perfect book that never leaves my computer. The dinner party of takeout Chinese food is better than the elegant dinner that I never host. Examples like that. So don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Good quote. All right. Oh, and I love this quote. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. Isn't that a great quote? Numbing. All right. So numbing vulnerability is especially debilitating because it doesn't just deaden the pain of our difficult experiences. It also dulls our experiences of love, joy, belonging, creativity, and empathy. We can't selectively numb emotion. Numb the dark and you numb the light. So, you know, if we don't have some bad experiences, we don't really appreciate the good ones, do we? And they're when we often learn the most is when we didn't get it right, when things didn't go exactly to plan. That's when we discover our resourcefulness or our innovation or our creativity, or, you know, we learn not to be an idiot. I don't know, but we learn, we grow, don't we? That's through mistakes, through it not going perfectly. What are we numbing and why? Americans today, and I think you can apply this to Australians today as well, are more debt-ridden, obese, medicated, and addicted than we have ever been. Drug overdoses in America used to be accidental deaths. Automobile accidents are now the second leading cause of accidental death in the United States. The leading cause, drug overdoses. In fact, more people die from prescription drug overdoses than from heroin, cocaine, and methamphetamine drugs use combined.
When did she write this book?
Good question, Glenn.
Still probably pretty relevant timescale wise, but
Just trying to find it. 2012.
there you go.
10 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. The most powerful need for numbing seems to come from combinations of all three things: shame, anxiety, and disconnection. Right. And one step beyond disconnection is isolation. So the most terrifying and destructive feeling that a person can experience is psychological isolation. This is not the same as being alone. It is a feeling that one is locked out of the possibility of human connection and of being powerless to change the situation. Why do you think they use isolation as a punishment, as a weapon of breaking someone? They put them in solitary confinement because we need other people. We need to communicate. We need to feel connected with other human beings. It's one of our main human needs. I'm just flicking through because we've got a few more pages to cover. All right, speed on, running out of time.
Interesting. So that was written in 2012.
Yep.
I heard something recently that's probably more and more act now post pandemic, whatever you want to think about it.
Yep.
I think the 1 in 4 Australian kids up to the age of 18, I think it was, were suffering with loneliness.
Yeah. I think that's definitely something post-pandemic era that we're going to be experiencing. A lot more people already. The stats are showing a lot more people suffering from depression, anxiety, mental health issues. There's going to be a knock-on effect from that because particularly Victoria had it really badly, didn't they? They had a really lengthy period of people being not allowed to leave their home. Was being prisoners in their own apartment.
280 something days.
Oh, incredible! It's like it was like a jail sentence almost, really. For
I've got friends over in Victoria and in Melbourne, and it was just shocking.
And if you went out, the police would not just arrest you; they would wrestle you to the ground. There was some horrific scenes. Again, media driven, of course, but there was some pretty nasty scenes going on of people who broke the rules or appeared to break the rules. And there's been a big pushback against that, with a lot of the fines being overturned now.
Yeah.
Fines that people had that were ridiculous in some cases. Okay. Interesting one about people surviving trauma and how people who develop resilience and lead full, wholehearted lives. But there's other people who become defined by their trauma. So what do the wholehearted do that enables them to cope better? They acknowledge the problem. They seek professional help and or support. They work through any accompanying shame and secrecy. and the approach to reintegration of vulnerability as a daily practice rather than a checklist item. Funnily enough, I was not funny at all, but I was just bad choice of expression. Interestingly enough, I was watching a program last night called Broadchurch, and the third series of that was about a rape. And it struck me, it was very, very powerful, where the lady who was the victim of this rape attack, she described it as feeling shame. She felt ashamed, as if in some way she had caused it. So she's been violently attacked and assaulted, and in some way she felt like she must have done something, and she couldn't think what it was, but she was haunted by this feeling that she may have done something that in some way caused it. And she felt so ashamed that she actually said, I actually sometimes feel as if I wish he'd killed me rather than let me live. And I just went, whoa, that's powerful.
You hear that a lot on victims of any sort, particularly that they blame themselves and they say, you know, how did I get myself in that position? It's my fault, sort of thing.
Yeah. And I know somebody who was raped, who I'm full of admiration for, and how she dealt with it, where she just said, I am not going to spend the rest of my life being a victim, because if I do that, I'm letting that person win, and I'm not being true to myself. So she said, I am determined that I will not be defined by that event. And I thought, wow, good on you.
Is that the background of Grace Tame as well, the Australian of the Year, young girl?
No.
I think similar to that, wasn't it? I think what she was.
I've just read the biography.
It was.
Sorry, that, well, kind of semi-autobiography, but it's more of a self-help book. Turia Pitt, Happy. So Turia was the long distance runner, the ultra marathon runner who was caught in a bushfire in the north of Western Australia. Absolutely incredible lady, very inspirational, and you know, I'd certainly, that's a book that I will be bringing up for review, because, and I'd love to meet her. Fascinating lady. What she went through to survive, not just survive it, but to turn it into a positive, of what, you know, and then to go on and lead a normal life where she's had children, or not normal, I shouldn't say that in inverted commas, but as normal as can be, given the impact of what's happened to her. A very, very powerful, and so now she's focused on being a speaker and an influencer on helping women to look at positive self-image, to be kinder to themselves, to be more well, everything that Brené is talking about in this book, to realize that you are enough, and you know, no matter what happens to you, you don't need to let what happens to you define who you are and how you respond to it. So very, very powerful stuff.
Yeah, I listened to Turia Pitt. She did a podcast with Sarah Grimberg, which I think is called In the Pursuit of Happiness, something like that, I think it is. No, Life of Greatness.
Oh yes.
Yeah, so Sarah Grimberg does a series of podcasts called Life of Greats with different people, and Turia Pitt was on that, and yeah, just like, well, only for an hour, but God, yeah, incredible lady. Just looking at Grace Tame, she was groomed at school by a 58-year-old teacher when she was 15. And then led to several assaults and that sort of stuff over the years. Now, you know, she's ended up being she was Australian of the Year in 2021 for her advocacy against sexual assault, survivors of sexual assault. Yeah.
And that's where people who have really traumatic things happen like that, if they can make sense of it and they can turn it into a cause to help other people, that's a very, very powerful thing, isn't it? And it really is empowering, rather than you know, could easily, you can understand how it would be easy to go the other way and to fall into shame and fear and not wanting to leave the house and getting depressed and all that sort of thing. You could see how it's a sliding door moment, isn't it, where you've got that choice. You either go down one path or you go down the other path, and they can define you. One of the shields she talks about, I thought this was quite funny, the reference to this movie. The movie was a comedy, that 1979 comedy, The In-Laws, starring Peter Falk and Alan Arkin, and one of them was a CIA operative, and he thinks nothing of car chases and shootouts, and it's quite a corny movie. But there's this scene where they have to get across this this field to get away from these snipers, and so the CIA guy, the expert, says, you've got a serpentine, you know, you've got to weave like a snake as you go across, so that they can't get a good aim on you to shoot the bullet at you. You know, you've got to keep weaving. And one of the guys, he runs across, doesn't get shot, and then realizes, oh, I didn't serpentine. So he goes back and runs back across the field again to do it the way he's been told to do it. He said serpentining is the perfect metaphor for how we spend enormous energy trying to dodge vulnerability when it would take far less effort to face it straight on. So sometimes talking about the elephant in the room can be the thing that enables it to be minimized, doesn't it? You're like, well, this is the big problem. None of us want to talk about it, but let's just bring it up and discuss it. And it's never as bad as what everyone was imagining it would be. Well, hypothetically, it might be worse, but it's okay because you're dealing with it.
Elephant becomes a rhino.
So when we see cruelty, vulnerability is likely to be the driver. Criticism, I don't mean productive feedback, debate and disagreement over the value or importance of a contribution, but put downs, personal attacks and unsubstantiated claims about our motivations and intentions. Cynicism, I don't mean healthy skepticism and questioning, talking about the reflexive cynicism that leads to mindless responses like that's so stupid. So those are all shields. And when you go into the arena, she says you're going to get kicked around, as in the speech, the man in the arena. So here's a sort of a summary of this section, I think. When we stop caring about what people think, we lose our capacity for connection. When we become defined by what people think, we lose our willingness to be vulnerable. If we dismiss all the criticism, we lose out on important feedback. But if we subject ourselves to the hatefulness, our spirits get crushed. It's a tightrope. Shame resilience is the balance bar, and the safety net below is the one or two people in our lives who can help us reality check the criticism and cynicism. So having good friends, people around you, enables you to cope. She said, if you're gonna put yourself out there, dare greatly, put your name on any posted comments online. Don't hide behind, you know, cryptic handles and things like that. If you don't feel comfortable owning it, then don't say it. Good advice, eh? Second strategy is also simple. I carry a small sheet of paper in my wallet that has written on it the names of people whose opinions of me matter. That's cool, isn't it? You think about it. If somebody thinks you're an idiot, ask yourself, does their opinion matter? Are they one of the people whose opinion I care about? And if it's somebody you do care about, explore it or ask them, what is it, you know, what do you think I've done, or what's your interpretation of what's happened, so that you can understand it and then you can sort of learn from it and move forwards. But if there's someone you don't care about, one of these snipers from afar or the keyboard warriors, don't let it get to you. And don't, I like this, a friend of hers, Scott Stratton, the author of Unmarketing, don't try to win over the haters. You're not the jackass whisperer. Great line, isn't it, to finish that chapter on. So you go, the Vulnerability Armory. That was it chapter 4? I think it was, yeah, chapter 4. Thoughts, people, comments before we go? Anyone want to add anything? What did you get from that this morning? Anything that stood out for you that was particularly valuable, or that you resonated with you for some reason?
There's a lot.
Jules, you look like you were bursting to say something then. Are you going to
No.
yeah, greatly and put yourself out there?
No, the same as Glenn. It is a hell of a lot, and I think you know, it's going to be probably a book that you should probably read more than once.
Yeah.
And probably even more than twice. You know, you get, I think you said it once too, you get different things out of books when you read them again. Movies, all sorts of things really. But, you know, and one like this with so much you know, information.
And I've just gone through four chapters and introduction with you in one session, which is, you know, more than I would normally do. Ideally, we want to break it down chapter by chapter. So we've got more time to discuss the things, but you know, with the fact that we've had a few people away and whatnot, it's been.
I can say, well done, you did a good job, Tony.
Thank you. I dared greatly and put myself out there. Glenn, anything that leapt out for you?
A big change for me years ago was actually starting to talk about how I felt about things when I was going through some stuff back in the corporate world, and when I came back and said, you know, this is what I'm feeling about whatever else, and it opened a lot of doors. One was the redundancy door, I think.
Yes.
But it's funny that what that was what I remembered. The redundancy for me years ago, it wasn't such a bad thing. It was sort of like I felt pretty good about it because I was made redundant because the position was redundant. I'd done what I was brought in to do for the company, and now it just sort of rolls over on its own. You know, it's automated and it carries on. So I wasn't needed anymore. They could have found me another job possibly, but I was more than happy to go anyway. And the timing was perfect with having just bought the business, so that was great. So it was a bit of a blessing. And actually, one of those GMs that I worked for years later, I asked her for a reference when I went for another role. And I happened to see the reference because the HR manager didn't lock down the file. And I came across it one day online. And she said, Glenn is very open in how he talks about things, sometimes maybe too open. But they hired me.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
It's a key point that you've brought up there. Redundancy is a big one, and I think a lot of that is because we are. What's the first question we ask when we meet somebody? What do you do? We allow ourselves in society to be defined quite often by our occupation, but that's not who we are. That's just something we do to earn a living, and it might be a transitory thing. We might have just taken a temporary job while we're going from A to B, you know. So, but we do that in our society, don't we? We look at people and go, well, what does he do for a living? Oh, you know, he can't be that smart if he's only doing that or whatever. You just don't know, do you? Like, and so if you've got a really good job and then you lose it, you hear these stories of guys that carry on going to work even though they're not at the work anymore because they don't want to tell the family that they've been fired or laid off, you know.
When I was made redundant, people found out that when I was sorry, I went, no.
I think that's changing. I think because we've had so much redundancy in particularly in Western Australia with mining booms and declines and things like that, that you just go, oh yeah, I got made redundant. And people actually quite often are almost proud of, oh yeah, I took a redundancy package, you know, I'm smart because I took the big payout, you know, and went on and then did what I really wanted to do anyway, or something like that. So it's not got the stigma that it used to have.
No, not at all.
In
people
the
say,
day,
oh, you know, well done, you know, well done for putting up with it for so long.
yeah, often the case. Yeah.
Getting out, yeah.
Stan, are you still with us, or are you able to comment at all? I know you might be busy doing something else. No. Okay. Well, oh yes, he is. He's here.
I'm back.
Did you have anything you want to add, Stan, or what? Did you anything?
Not really, but kind of the same sort of stuff that was coming up in Brené's book was coming up in yesterday's book, which I can't remember what it was called. It was the same factor about trauma and especially rape and sexual assault and stuff. It was, and the same with like drugs and overdosing and being disconnected and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, very much. So if we can work on wholehearted living and learning to dare greatly, then we can realize that we are enough, and we don't need to take those avoidance tactics of numbing and hiding and feeling bad and all that sort of thing. So thank you all this morning for your attendance and your input. It's been great. Sorry I've had to cover so much content in one hit. It'll be easier next week, I promise. And next week we'll be covering chapter 5, Mind the Gap, Cultivating Change and Closing the Disengagement Divide. Hope you can join me for that. And thanks again. Have a great week ahead.
Thanks, guys. Hopefully, next week.